Okay, one more time. And
All
it's going to
right.
be like, this is going to be the perfect career civility pitch right now because you've had 3 times to practice and
Yep. Third time is a charm. We'll see if I can get this right. So hi, sorry, you were just staring at the slide introducing your speaker. My name is Jenna Rogers. I am the founder of Career Civility. Career Civility is a communication consulting and training firm, and I'm on a mission to help people communicate more effectively in the workplace. We've been talking about therapy, and you go to therapy in your personal life to help you have those tough conversations with your friends, your family, and I recognize that in the workplace, having tough conversations, even just having simple practices of effective communication is a little bit more challenging when you have power dynamics involved, when there are titles, different hierarchies, when you have client partner relationships, and no one has really ever been taught how to communicate effectively in the workplace. We learn through osmosis, we learn through observing, trial and error, and people communicate very differently based on your communication style, based on the context of the relationship. So I'm really fortunate enough because the last 10 years of my career, I've been in B2B tech sales. And so I also have a unique lens of being able to communicate effectively, but then also understanding the impact of revenue and helping enable revenue professionals to be, if you can communicate effectively, you can be successful and productive in terms of hitting quota, making sure that you're hitting all your KPIs, building those really solid client relationships. So I'm excited to be here with Speckett today to talk more about all things enablement, onboarding, tough conversations, effective communication.
at what point do you see people like bringing you on in an organization? I doubt there's very many that say, you know what, our communication's not great because most of them don't have great communication, but how many of them will actually admit that and recognize the need to bring
Yeah.
in somebody who's going to help them? Yeah, like what are the pressure points that you see when somebody brings you on?
Yeah. So I actually have one unicorn client that I really love working with because they are so ahead of the game. They're actually they've worked hybrid and now they are going to a remote model. And we're talking about having a session where let's just talk about expectations for communication in a remote setting, which again, we never really did, right? Everyone just went remote and we had to figure it out and figure out what Zoom best practices were, what, Slack, Teams, Zoom chat or GChat best practices were. So I do have clients who are really thinking ahead of the game, but usually they bring me in when there's personnel challenges
Mhm.
and when they have to let people go or when there's a reorg and they need to start fresh or they need a dose of positive culture realignment so that way they can all work as a team.
Wonderful. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. That's actually a great segue into our first segment, which we call the listening room. And so, we have our set segments, but I'm very interested to hear your take on all of these, based on your experience in effective communication. So tell me a bit about what you believe, and we're going to ask the audience as well if you have any thoughts on this, please put them in the chat and we can address those as well. But what do you believe is the greatest challenge for enablement professionals today?
Uh, right now, I think of it as like the shiny object syndrome. It's that, there's always something new to be doing. Especially in tech, the market is changing so rapidly. And for us to adopt new ideas, new tools, roll out new tools to our team, expect our team to change KPIs because we had one down quarter or one bad quarter, and then we're changing our KPIs and expecting reps to perform as if nothing had changed and they didn't just go through this big transition. That I think is really, really challenging, not only for enablement professionals, but sales reps and leaders alike.
Let's see if anybody else in the chat have some thoughts on what the greatest challenge might be.
Yeah, I also forgot to mention that. I always say this in my workshops, but like it's not lost on me that I'm talking about communication. So I really encourage you to share your perspective so that way we can further the conversation. Because just as much, as we're talking about this, I also welcome the opportunity to learn from everyone who's actually, having these conversations with their teams.
And you mentioned like your career specifically is going and helping organizations manage the communication aspect that happens during all of this change. Do you have any like how do you go in and assess the problem that's happening when you're entering these companies?
It's a good question. And I think it's twofold. One, and this is going to sound very simple, but listening to the reps and going in as this. Now I am, instead of in-house, I'm working on like the consulting contracting side. So
Mhm.
I'm able to come in using a really unique lens of this third party. I'm not in charge of their, compensation. I'm not in charge of their performance reviews. I'm really there to be an added resource for them for the time that I'm working with a client. So I'm able to have those conversations with the reps. I'm able to shadow calls and I'm really able to truly listen and observe to be able to get that qualitative data. Then, when I'm working with my stakeholders and the sales leaders and the executive leadership, I'm able to glean information from the data. So, using their CRM, using their recorded calls, and understanding the data. So, that quantitative aspect alongside the qualitative aspect helps inform my approach, helps inform the advice that I'm giving, and ultimately like the deliverables.
I love that you start from the bottom up. I'm sure the person who's actually signing your contract and deciding to bring you on board is not the sales reps themselves, and they probably have their own idea of what's happening and what's going wrong. But by starting by listening to the reps first and then bringing that information, bringing that knowledge upward, I can see that, yeah, making a huge difference.
Yeah.
Jordan mentioned in the chat here, buy-in with new tools, sales methodologies have been challenging after tough quarters. Do you have any advice that you can give on that specifically?
Hi, Jordan. Uh, New tools. That's hard because it's like, here's this new tool that we just paid a lot of money for, and it's going to make your life so much easier, but it's going to be really hard for you to get used to the tool. Like Elle and I were just talking about Goldcast as a new tool. Like it has so many great features and functionalities, but it can be hard to adopt, and it's not going to be without its challenges and speed bumps. So I think meeting them where they're at, and I know you also mentioned like sales methods. So like, what are they used to using? What method do they currently use? What tools do they currently use? What is the new tool or method? What is the end goal there? And then how can we almost build stepping stones for them? So you're starting here with the old tool or method. Here's what the new tool or method can do for our team, for you, for our organization. Instead of just expecting them to hop from point A to point B, how can we put like 2, 3, or 4 stepping stones to help them adopt this new method or these new tools? So it can be really simple as, watch this recording on this new tool. It can be like join this live call. That's the first step, right? And then it's enabling them to do it on their own. And then it's enabling them to download their own insights or their reporting from it. So that way we can walk them through the process of adopting and getting buy-in.
Mhm. I imagine that can be much more impactful than, okay, everybody, here's this new tool. Let's sit through a 1 week. Let's take you away from selling, first of all, even when you're not hitting targets. And let's sit through a 1 week training session on how to use this new tool that I'm introducing.
Yeah, yeah. You nail it. And Spec It knows like that just in time learning. Like, how can you piggyback on what they're already doing, and then just enhance it just by one degree that day, or one step, or one percentage that day, and then by the end of the month, it's a completely different game.
hmm I want to circle up real quick to Chad's comment as well, and like the agility of both probably the tools and the programs that are being rolled out as business evolves. Do you have any best practices or tips that you can share? I mean, a lot of these, like if you're rolling out a new sales methodology, and we're talking about months and months of work that go into that. But as you mentioned before, the business is constantly changing. And so, how do you bake agility into these new programs and tools that you're rolling out?
Yeah, I just scrolled up to that. And for some reason, when I read that, I thought of resilience. Like, I think
Mm,
building a program that is agile enough, like, I think, how do you build resilience alongside your team throughout this change? Because that's really what the end result of change management is, right? It's watching everyone on your team be incredibly resilient despite this, still hitting their targets, or if they didn't hit their targets, they bounce back the next month or the next quarter. So when it comes to, having a sales team that's really resilient or agile enough to adapt to all these changes, I think you bring them into the conversation. And I think sometimes, Elle, you mentioned it, like starting at the ground floor versus like leadership. I think that's sometimes where we get it wrong, because we have our stakeholders, we have our leaders, the stakeholders, the leaders, the executives, however you want to identify or define that group. We're working behind the scenes to enable this change for months, and then we roll it out to the sales team, and to them it seems very abrupt and like, oh, we weren't expecting these changes, or we had heard rumblings about them, we had heard rumors, which is even worse. So it's very difficult to adopt that transition. So I think we bring them into the fold, like we bring them into the planning phase of it. We tell the team what's going on. We don't want to distract them from being productive, but we also want to be transparent with them, and we want to give them credit for their ideas and the feedback. And then, it's a business. At the end of the day, we share the ROI on it, right? We share the productivity results here. So I think that is a great way to build agile and resilient programs, is being transparent with them, bringing them into the fold, so that way this doesn't seem like an abrupt change, and that's a lot harder to adapt to than something that you're familiar with and you knew you had time to prepare was coming.
absolutely. And I think you're always going to come head to head with those individuals who are especially resistant to change. And when
Yeah.
I say that, does anyone come to mind for you? I'm sure we've all interacted with people like that. I'd be curious to hear if you have a story about going into an organization and there was one individual in particular who was completely resistant to the new program and the changes that you were rolling out, and how you were able to overcome that.
It's the beauty and the Achilles heel of sales, right? Because it's probably your top performers who are most resistant, because they're like, listen, I've brought in the most revenue for this company doing it the way that I've done it. So why would I change? So I think, oh gosh, how do you go about this? Again, this is dependent on the leader, dependent on the organization. What I've found is that if you're enacting change and that top performer usually has great influence on the team, right? And if they don't want to adopt change, it's going to be harder for the more junior people who look up to them to adopt change. So that person, from a change management perspective, is going to be highly, highly influential in making sure the rest of the organization adopts change. You also then have to decipher, are they still positive about this? Like, what's the impact and the contribution to the culture of the organization? Are they still positive? Are they involved? Are they engaged? Because if they're not, that's a completely different conversation that we have. But if they are still bought in and they are engaged, I think it would be worthwhile to be even more transparent and bring them into the fold and give them a seat at the table, so that way they can then influence change down the line. There's another conversation that we have if they are just absolutely not adhering to the change. Again, that's a business decision that we had to make. This is how we're operating on a new sales method. And if you're not adopting this, there are going to be consequences, because these are our expectations. And then, again, sales, like, your numbers speak for themselves. So if you're not, keeping up with your KPIs, or your quota is suffering, those are definitely lagging indicators to look at.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said to identifying those individuals who are like the angriest when you come into their room, and reining them in as your champions, building that, as you're saying before, like that respect and trust with them first, and then giving them a seat at the table.
Yeah, some of my favorite reps to work with are people who are like, I don't know about this, but like I'm here, right? Like I want to hear it out. I want to get feedback. Those are some of my favorite people to work with because they are cautiously hesitant about
Mhm.
it, and that's for good reason because what they're doing works well for them and they've gotten comfortable with. So that's normal and that's okay, and we can work with that. It is the reps who don't even show up for the meeting and they're like, I'll catch the recording later, like I'm not even going to pay attention. That's really hard to work with.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's only so much you can do with that, unfortunately.
Yep.
Well, I'm going to hop us into breaking the ice segment 2. I would love to hear both your top tips for successfully onboarding and ramping new reps, as well as any top tips anyone from the audience can share in the chat with us.
Yeah, I would love to learn tips because I don't know it all. We're all every organization's different. I would say every onboarding class, every person you're onboarding is different. So what works for someone may not work for someone else. So I'm always interested to crowdsource new ideas to try as well. I come from a more traditional background in terms of onboarding. And I marry this with my research on intergenerational communication in the workplace and how the workplace is such a melting pot of so many different generations
Mhm.
alongside of it. So we have to cater not only to different learning styles, but also different generations and different societal experiences of individuals and how they have been taught throughout their career. I will say traditionally, what I mean by that is you can have all the tools and technology in the world to help enable and onboard reps, but I think it comes back to building those one to one relationships. So making sure that when you are onboarding reps, you have time in your calendar to have meetings with them,
Mhm.
daily check in meetings with them, 20 minutes, go for a walk when you're on your commute or whatever it may be at lunch. Check in with them. Make sure that they know that you are a resource available to them. You can build a relationship that way. You can answer any questions that way. You are able to see some of the gaps in the onboarding as well. So they're able to onboard faster versus a rep who's just following the typical onboarding schedule and they get to the end of week 3 and you're like, they're nowhere near ready to where they need to be right now. So I think building time into your onboarding calendar as a leader or as an enablement professional to build those one-on-one relationships is very worthwhile.
Tell me, do you feel like this check-in time differs from the additional coaching sessions you might be doing while you're ramping new reps? You're digging into their calls and helping them understand how to better position themselves and things like that. Like, would you say that this check-in time complements that, or it is on top of that, or replaces?
Mm, great question. So I think that what is the word that I'm looking for? Like it combines together. So if you are having these coaching calls, so you have your team meetings, you have your one-on-one meetings, and then let's say like one coaching call per week, right? So that's basically 3 check-ins, and then make sure that you have 2 other, one a day, to get FaceTime with them and to talk about how things are going because those structured times are where they're coming to you and they're kind of letting you facilitate that meeting. The one-on-one time for their first couple weeks, they're likely, letting you take the reins. Same thing with coaching. And then the team meeting, they're really going to be observant there and understand how the team dynamic works. So if you're able to schedule, and you could even delegate this to reps on the team, it doesn't necessarily have to be the manager, but uh, for lack of better words, enabling them to meet with other people on the team. They could be cross-functional partners at least twice a week. So that way they're learning how other people work. And it's also that chance to get the qualitative data that they might not be sharing with you in those formal one-on-one situations or the team meetings.
Mhm. Yeah, that was going to be my next question. I'm sure there's organizations in which like this much one-on-one time might not scale, but being able to identify like a buddy onboarding rep for them, maybe somebody a little more seasoned who they can have those conversations with outside of you would be very helpful.
Exactly. And that is something that I think translates very well across different generations, because if you think about the older generations, boomers and Gen X, they didn't have any of this online onboarding. It was all, they had a buddy, they had a mentor, they followed them, they observed them, they sat in on meetings, and that's how they learned. So by being able to facilitate that for the younger reps, there's a conversation about how younger reps don't necessarily take the initiative to do that. I do think it has to be designed for them. Make sure that you're setting up that like mentorship or that observing relationship with different people in the organization for at least the first 4 weeks, maybe even the first 2 to 3 months.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that. I'm going to circle up to Chad's comment here. He says, I think he's speaking about like how often reps are hesitant about change until they realize it makes their life easier, makes them more productive, and ultimately increases their commission, right? How do you communicate this vision to reps without them being able to see or use this new tool or this change firsthand?
Yeah, you're like, why aren't you drinking the Kool-Aid? Like, we
Yeah.
gave it to you. It's cold. It tastes so good. Like, let's go. Everybody else is. I think this is where you have to understand their personal motivations. Why do they show up every day? Why are they hustling? What drives them to be at the top of the leaderboard? If you can understand that and connect it to how this change is going to impact that, either in a positive or a negative way, it might not be like the magic potion, but I think it will help you get one step closer to where you need to go.
Mm-hmm. Helping them identify their North Star. Do you have like a set of questions that you traditionally ask to help uncover these motivations?
I
We don't have
do.
to address them even today, but like something that we could send to everyone afterwards would be really great.
Yeah, I can send those over. I actually just did a workshop yesterday. And some of the questions I talked about, just simple, like, why do you show up for work every day? What are your goals? And then how can this company or this job help you meet your needs and your goals?
I love that. And are these both like personal and professional goals?
Yeah, I think more so both personal and professional, but I think that once you understand their personal motivations, that's the undercurrent of a lot of their professional drive.
Mhm. Absolutely. All right, I'm going to hop over to segment 3.
Yeah.
Let's take a new approach. All right, Jenna, I would love to hear about an experiment or something new you've implemented that's helped reps adopt new initiatives, processes, or has had a positive impact on success and the results. And again, anyone in the chat here would love to hear any stories that you can share as well.
Yeah. Um, I will take it from a unique lens because my work right now has really been focused on Gen Z in the workplace
Mhm.
and making sure that we are enabling Gen Z to be as productive, but also as professional as they can be. I've noticed some conversations that I've had lately. I mean, it's in the media, there are headlines like Gen Z is getting fired at an alarming rate. It's hard to hire Gen Z. They don't want to work very hard, yada, yada. So this has been, in my world, a very loud topic. And
Mhm.
one thing that I have started to do, one, through presentations and workshops that I've been doing, but then two, also working with clients on creating expectations that fold into their onboarding process. So when you're onboarding, you think about your tools, your technologies, the org chart, the roles and responsibilities. But what I've been doing with a couple of clients I've been working with is taking it one step further. What are the expectations that you need to communicate to your new team members? Expectations such as, I don't know if we talked about this before, Elle, but like your Zoom background. Should
Mhm.
you have a company branded Zoom background? Should your background be blurred? It's very dependent on the client and the organization, but I work with a client where they travel a lot for work. So they mandate a company branded background because sometimes when they're working at coffee shops or in the airport, it's distracting. I've also worked with clients where they want the background unblurred. They don't want anything in the background because they want to incite their clients to not have a background, so that way they can learn from each other. Typically in your background or in your office, there's pieces about you that you can learn to help build the relationship from a sales perspective. So little expectations such as like, what should your Zoom background look like? What is the primary channel of communication for our organization? I've worked with clients where they are a very Slack heavy organization. And if you send them an email for approvals, it's going to take 3 to 4 days. If you send it via Slack, you'll get it same day. Do you have to have, so then if you're a Slack driven organization, should you have Slack on your phone? What are the expectations of having access to email app, Slack on your phone versus on your computer, your working hours? Should your calendar be shared and public? Should it not? How do you block your calendar when you're taking time off or when you have an appointment? These might seem like very simple and trivial expectations, but to someone new who's entering your team, your organization, they had something completely different. They had to learn something completely different at their old organization. So take the time to think about simple tasks that is going to set people up for success. And you're not going to run into that conflict down the line.
Do you come into any organization where they have all of these expectations documented already?
No, I've
No.
never. Yeah. I've not. And they're like, well, we do this, well, we do this, well, we do this. And I'm like, write it down. Write it
Yeah.
down.
Good for
And
us.
that's
Like we could have one or two of those, but definitely not all of those. It's such a great point.
yeah, and then documenting it, because I think that when it comes to communication and when it comes to difficult conversations and communicating with hard to work people, when it's documented, it's really hard for there to be any gray area.
Yeah.
Screenshots last forever, right? So if you can point it to documentation, and I understand there's a lot of places from a CMS, an LMS, your inbox, Google Drive, there's a lot of places to keep information, but it's necessary. You have to document it. You have to write it down.
Yeah, it's got to be like the general rule of thumb is like, just don't assume anything is obvious.
Exactly. Yes. And just even in how you're communicating with people, don't assume that someone communicates how you communicate, right? So there's just there's so much humility that we need in business, but it's really hard to be humble when our paycheck relies on it, right? We're like, no, we have to know the answer. We have to be smart. We have to know this because I won't get paid if I don't. And I think if we embrace the opposite, it probably works in our favor.
Yeah, and I'm sure like so many organizations haven't even had the chance to sit and think about how we do communicate as a team. You know what? Like now that you're asking, like maybe we do communicate better on Slack, or maybe there are certain things for emails, but it's like going through that exercise and actually documenting it that aligns the entire organization, not just the new people.
And some of the best organizations that I work with realize that they embrace the non-dominant communication styles. So, just communication styles in general. Typically, there's profiles for people in leadership, a profile for, a CFO versus a CRO versus a CEO. And typically those are the dominant leaning personalities, and everyone has to flex their communication style to meet them. But when it's flipped and the leaders can flex their communication styles to the people that they're working with, it's really productive because both are able to learn from each other versus the individual contributors trying to meet the executives or the stakeholders where they're at. If you flip it, it creates a more approachable organization, and you're able to have those conversations without such high stakes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I want to, while we're here as well, I want to chat a little bit about, part of the topic within this webinar was how to have these very difficult conversations. And I think we've scratched the surface in a lot of different places. But I'm thinking specifically about when you are going to a sales rep and you have to have a performance conversation. There's dozens of different ways to do it. And this can play into like the company communication style as well that you're training your leaders on. But is it the crap sandwich? Can I say that on the webinar? Is it radical candor, or is there something in between that you are coaching these leaders on to have these conversations?
Oh, I know, the like good, bad, good. So then they just leave with the good and they're like, oh, whatever, the bad I'll work on later. I love Kim Scott's work of radical candor. That is something that I will always subscribe to. From a communication standpoint, I try to make it a little bit more tactical because I think that when it comes to these performance review conversations or just feedback in general, a lot of it is very high level and it doesn't get down to like what actually needs to get said.
Mhm.
So I try to abide by three like tips or rules. The first thing is never make it personal. There's a very big difference between uh, like you're this is obviously an extreme example, but like you're lazy versus you have not been submitting the work that is needed for this project by the deadline, right? So there's a very big difference between a personal like a personal attack or personal
Mhm.
feedback versus tactical feedback. So don't make it personal, number one. Two, give specific examples. So as you can just see in that example, I said, you know, you didn't submit XYZ by the timeline of Tuesday, October 29th. We needed this on this day in order to move the project forward. So give very specific examples when you're giving feedback. And then always provide next steps or a go forward plan or just one piece of action that they can take to improve. And sometimes you can even ask them what that action would be. So, you know, we need this by this date moving forward. How are you going to ensure that this is submitted on time? What steps are
Mhm.
you going to take to make sure that this is submitted on time? In the world of sales, you know, if you need different discovery questions, better discovery questions, instead of just being like, you know, you don't do discovery very well. What like what feedback is that for them? How are they supposed to get better at, you know, conducting a discovery call if they don't exactly know where to improve? So you can say, you know, you missed a couple key points on that discovery call. Questions like A, B,
Mhm.
and C will glean a lot of information from the client so we can move this proposal forward. Um, I'm curious how you are going to practice demoing or how you can blend these questions into your conversation or your talk track on a discovery call. And then you can always say, you know, record your next call, send it to me, invite me to the next call. Like that's the follow up action.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm sure there's so many times where we don't even realize that we're making it personal when we actually are. Like there's things that we say in a very soft and caring way that I can actually feel quite personal.
Correct.
And so by removing that element altogether and just focusing on what you've learned about their call and the feedback that you have, it makes it much easier to avoid slipping into that crack.
Correct. Yeah, even if you think it's that intent versus impact, right? So when in doubt, just really rely on the examples, the facts. You can even say, like, if you're observing something, you can say, you know, from my perspective, you really missed a lot of key talking points in that discovery call. I was looking for X, Y, and Z. What, like, tell me more about that conversation. How come you didn't ask those questions? Where, you know, where was your thought process going? What talk track do you have? That also bleeds into, like, you know, getting curious with your reps, and that's a big part of coaching, is getting
Mm,
curious. And a lot of times we're too busy to even get curious and ask that. But especially for enablement professionals, if we're able to get curious about that, we can create processes to mitigate that in the future.
absolutely. Well, Jenna, this was so wonderful. I know myself and everyone on this call learned so much today. I'm excited to share any takeaways you have with this group as well. Um, can we do this again?
I don't know. Are you going to be asked back to host? Just kidding.
Probably. We'll circle back
No,
on.
I'm sorry. It was totally me not going on stage. That was my fault. So I'm sorry for the first like
No,
10
no,
minutes
that's
or so of
okay.
being a
Well, it's
ghost.
we were just talking about the complexities of Goldcast, and then that happened, so it was meant to be.
Yeah, that was some irony for both of us. But now we know.
Oh,
See, we can learn,
now
we
we
build in the
know.
process, add it to the stops. Yeah, yeah,
Well, for anything that was missed, we're going to send the recording out to everyone after. We'll send the takeaways. Thank you all for participating. It really helped to keep the conversation going and helped us learn from you as much as you from us. So,
yeah.
thank you very much, Jenna, and we'll chat
Thanks
with
for
you all
joining and
soon.
thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye.